Hello there and welcome to this week's Badly Written Online News. This week we're going to look at VE Day. On the 7th of May 1945, Germany surrendered. World War II was over. And that was celebrated on Friday, and the day is about remembering all those people who died during the war and also to learn lessons from what happened prior to and after the war. So let's look at some of those things, some of the big issues that led to them that we can look at today. So this relates this to current affairs to today. And there are 5 things we need to remember. The first one was that the reason for the war in the first place was poverty. Poverty was caused in Germany by the Wall Street crash in America. Money came back in, people had no money, no food, and out of this, Adolf Hitler came along and he said, I will make Germany strong again, and he blamed the Jewish people for the problems that Germany was having. So he had a scapegoat, the Jewish people, and he said he had a solution, and enough people went with him that he managed to succeed, even though he was never voted in, to get power. So poverty led to Hitler rising in Germany. And you can look at what happens when people are in poverty, because it does lead to this kind of radical solution. There are 2 other recent parallels. Trump won in America because traditional states in Michigan and the northern Rust Belt, called the Rust Belt for the reason the industry had declined, were told by Trump that the fault was with Mexicans and foreigners, and the politicians were all corrupt, and that he had the solutions. And someone from the right wing nationalism, make America great again, build the borders, it's immigrants' fault, and he got elected, even though, interestingly, he got less votes than Hillary Clinton, but he won in more areas. Same thing happened in this country with Brexit. Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage. Brexit, if you look at the campaign, was blame the EU, blame foreigners, put the borders up, let's bring back control. And again, Brexit won. And the reason it won is that enough people in areas in the north and where there had been industry that had declined decided that what have they got to lose, and they voted for Brexit. It's bad enough now. How can it get any worse? So there's 3 examples of why poverty can lead to radical change for the worst in, I think, all 3 of those cases. But in one of them, you may have a different view on Brexit. The second thing that we've got to remember about the Second World War was the Holocaust. 6 million Jewish people were killed by Hitler. Hitler tried to commit genocide, getting rid of that's genocide is when you try and get rid of a particular group of people. And the people he tried to get rid of, amongst others, but mainly was Jewish people. And he set up concentration camps and murdered and killed in the most horrendous way. And we should never, ever, ever, ever forget that. And the name given to that genocide was the Holocaust. And we must never, ever forget that, that happened. The third thing to remember is that the people who died fighting in the war to defeat Hitler, who fought for democracy, because it was fascism. Hitler was a fascist. He was one person in control, controls the press, no dissent. He runs everything, and he built up a war machine that inevitably went to war, as war machines have to. And Britain and others fought back, and it's the others that people forget. There were people from all over the world who died fighting for the Allies, from Africa, from the Caribbean, from India, from the Sikhs. There were millions of people who died. Britain would not have won the war had it not had the help of the Commonwealth. And it's really important that we remember that. So there were 21 million soldiers who died in World War II. On both, that includes both sides, and there were 50 million civilians who died. So that's a huge, huge waste of life, and something we should never, ever forget. But we should also never forget, and we do forget, the people who died from outside of the UK. And one of the main person who's held up on days like today is Winston Churchill, who made some incredible speeches. I mean, the hairs on the back of your neck will go up. I have a problem with Winston Churchill. If you look at some of the things he did, how he dealt with a famine in Bengal, how he dealt with how his views on white supremacists and some other things. But you have a look at Winston Churchill, but he was certainly a brilliant, iconic figure during the war. But be careful about holding him up too high. He was against the National Health Service, which was set up in 1948 as well. So there were people who died. War leads to change. Women in the war started to work in the factories. After the war, they wanted to carry on having equal rights with men. That was a huge change. Soldiers came back. People thought Churchill would be elected. They voted for a government of Bevan and Attlee that brought in the National Health Service, pensions, education, and so on. So when you get big events like the Second World War, you get big changes. And we may find after this virus ends and the lockdown ends with the fact we're going to have a recession as well, where people are going to, a lot of unemployment, and it's going to take some time to get back to where we were. How's the government going to react to that? Are they going to come up with some brand new ideas, like I talked about last week, universal income for everyone? But they won't do unless young people vote. People over 60, around 75% of people over 60 will vote in an election. People 18 to 24, it's about 50%. Who are you going to look after as a politician? I mentioned it last week. I'll mention it again. You've got to vote. Finally, be aware of war rhetoric. A lot of you guys out there are studying language, and you certainly want to understand about language when you're doing your GCSE or your functional skills or your ESOL qualifications. Think about some of the language that's being used at the moment to describe the virus. The virus is an enemy. We've got to defeat the enemy. We're at war with it. We're at war with COVID-19. We've got to save the economy, save our country. The frontline warriors are the healthcare personnel. The home front is people isolating at home. The traitors and deserters are people who break the social distance rules. If you think about the rhetoric used by Trump and Farage and others about the invasion of our country by immigrants, about fighting for our borders, about defending our shores, about the traitors who steal our jobs and use the National Health Service, even though the National Health Service would not function without immigrants from abroad coming and working here. So that's not often mentioned. So there you go. There's 5 things that you should remember. We should learn from war. And the last one is about, the rhetoric of the war. The one before that is about change. And we are going to face a recession after the COVID, after we come out of the lockdown, which we will do gradually. Who's going to suffer? Young people are going to suffer more. The Resolution Foundation came out this week and said 640,000 jobs between 18 to 24-year-olds would likely disappear. In the past, recessions have led to young people suffering, as I mentioned last week. So next week, I'm going to look at some of the skills and the qualifications that you need to develop, because the other thing that's going to happen is there's going to be more automation. So next week will be about automation and skills that people need. So this week's words, keywords that I want you to spell. All the answers will be in TED-Ed. The first one, poverty, when people haven't got any money, high unemployment, no money. The second one, fascism, Hitler was a fascist. The third one is nationalism, that's people like Donald Trump, people like Farage, the hide behind the flag. It's all about looking after the country that they're in, very nationalistic. Democracy is a word, democracy. Holocaust, the Holocaust, which is a name given to the Hitler's attempt to kill all the Jewish people, commit genocide on the Jewish people. Radical, that's a different radical, a new solution, if you like. Turnout is how many people turn out at the election. I mentioned the turnout for over 60s is about 75%. That's turnout. How do you spell turnout? Apathetic. Apathetic is a word used to describe young people, to say they're apathetic, they don't care, they're not bothered, they're on the phones. I don't believe that. I think young people do care, and hopefully they will start to engage in politics and we'll get some real change. Propaganda is when words are used for political ends. They're used to get a reaction. They're not neutral, they're biased. So, it's rhetoric and propaganda are good words. And the final word is traitors. So that's when people go against the dominant ideas, people who are traitors to their country or whatever. So there's your 10 words. I've tried to keep the video a bit shorter this week. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll go on TED-Ed and I'll see you all next week when we look at a new topic, which will be automation and skills for the future. Stay safe.